welcome to Indic Academy, Greg. Thank you so much for
You-
giving us time so early in the morning in Chicago, I think, around 8 a.m.
Yes, thank you so much for your interest. And
Thank
I'm
you.
happy to talk about
And
Surabhi.
yeah, could you tell us something about your music, Greg? You're a bassist from, yeah.
Yeah, sure. I think, especially after hearing a little bit of the interview that you did with Saraswati, I will start by saying that my parents are both professional musicians. My father plays woodwind, saxophone, clarinet, bassoon, and my mother plays piano and accordion. And they have performed and also taught music all of their lives. So music was something that was very much in my household all the time, beginning at a pretty early age. Um, I studied formally in university as a vocalist, and eventually turned to the bass and electric bass a little bit later in life. You know, someone like Sarah, I think, started playing Veena very, very early. I didn't actually start playing any stringed instrument until I was in university. But I adopted the bass and really enjoyed it. I have performed a pretty wide variety of music, definitely including jazz, pop, and rock and roll, soul music, R&B, as it's called in the U.S. I've also done quite a bit of experimental music. Currently, I play in a jazz quintet that I've played with for a long time. I perform with Surabhi, um, and just sort of zooming in, the performance I have tomorrow night is in Chicago, and I'm playing definitely progressive rock music. For It's a benefit for an organization in Chicago that is having a large fundraiser. So I think that's a little bit. If you had a question about one area of it, I'd be happy to talk a little bit
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. Could you tell me thank you for that first, but and could you tell me what music means to you, Greg? In
Hmm.
India, from ancient times, music served a purpose in society. It was meant for spiritual upliftment.
Hmm.
And music as entertainment is a very modern phenomenon,
Hmm.
and it was used as a vehicle for a divine transcendental experience, and it does have that power in most musical forms. So what does music mean to you? And since you have lived and grown up in a house where music was heard and played all the time,
Yes.
is yeah. So
Yeah.
what is your connect to music?
Well, the first thing that I would say in response to a wonderful question that you're asking me is that what music means to me is changed, from, throughout my life. I think at some point, um, perhaps incorrectly, I was really focused on the idea that music is communication, right? And oftentimes it is. Music can be storytelling. Music can be conveying emotions, especially when music is being performed or shared. But, I think as I get older and hopefully a little bit wiser, one of the things that I realize is that it doesn't have to be. Music actually can be something experienced completely internally, and in a wonderful way. It can be something that's meditative and contemplative, where it is, I think, this overlaps or touches upon how you describe it. Music can sometimes be transcendental, right? That it can be a point of focus for our minds and our thoughts. It can take us sort of out of our current reality and to other places, just sort of through our focus. Um, I also would say that that is also not the only thing that music is. I love sharing music, as a performer and oftentimes as an audience member. Uh, I think that another thing that people often say, about music, people often say that music is a universal language. I also used to think that that might be true. And I think, again, as I get a little bit older and wiser, I don't think that it is entirely universal. I think that music, like languages in India that we were talking about before we began the interview, there's so many languages in India. There are so many different languages in India, that we don't, no one speaks all of them fluently, right? So they oftentimes they're specific to a culture, but also they can just be some type of specificity within a culture, a style, a genre. And mostly though, and I'm sure that maybe if I live long enough, I'll find that I'm again not correct. But currently, I'm definitely focused on music as a as just a self-expression, which could be communication if somebody else is listening, or it could just be an act of self-expression that is um, something that I even occasionally do just for myself. It's something that soothes me. And I think when I do share it, that it's also something that people can find stories and communication in, or emotion and relation and empathy through. So I don't know how to sum all of that up, but those are some of the things that I've thought about over time, that in trying to understand music myself.
Yeah. Thank you. As we say that music is all of these elements, it has also been said that music is perhaps the only thing which is sufficient by itself at in every moment. You don't have to listen for a 1 hour concert to experience something at the end of something,
Hmm.
which usually happens like in a movie. The experience is complete only at the end of the movie. In a book, the experience is complete only at the end of the book. But for music, in every minute is complete in itself. Would you say that for rock or other contemporary forms?
Huh. It's a fascinating idea. Uh, I would say that oftentimes, especially with I can't speak to rag and Indian, especially Indian classical musical styles, Carnatic, etc. But in my own musical sort of heritage and knowledge, I think about different musical forms, where there's the A section, the B section, the B section, the A section, arranged in some order. It could be a sequence of notes. It could be chords that are played in this order and then manipulated. Or so, in some ways, I feel that while the experience of music in just one moment without a beginning and an end can be complete, and that's amazing, there's even more depth and richness to music oftentimes if it is understood in the context of composition and of thought. Um, anyone who is either improvising or composing or creating music is thinking. And I think when you're listening to someone play music, you are listening to them think, right? It's through the lens of music. But how people think about theme and variation, how people approach improvisation and the tools that people use to enhance or to direct their improvisation. Those are all really interesting sort of contexts where, like, sometimes by the end of the concert, you do have this realization about the first thing that you heard at the beginning.
Mm.
Understanding it in a different way because the composer or the performers have transformed it.
Yeah.
I
So, when we talk about communication, Craig, one of the things is its opposite, which is miscommunication, and that
mm,
almost never happens in music. So, is that something unique to music, where even when you come together with musicians from other parts of the world, other genres, there's rarely a wrong note in terms of either personal relations or in the music. So, what is it about music which eliminates that negative aspect of communication?
I think that well, there are wrong notes, but there are only there are only wrong notes if someone thinks about them as being wrong, right?
Yeah.
And I think this probably speaks to many other disciplines and parts of our lives, and not just music. But the person who thinks that I play the most wrong notes is me, right? My collaborators don't hear quite as many wrong notes. And I think that, sort of zooming out, one of the the topics that this touches on is that idea, even if it's really an incomplete idea about the music being something universal. And it isn't. Not everybody plays music the same way. Not everybody hears and listens to music the same way. But we do have this opportunity to experience music, and it's just a little bit more accessible than literature. Where, in order to read
Mm.
a piece of literature written in a language that you don't know, you really have to study for years and years and years in order to be able to do that. Whereas music, you might not understand. You may react completely differently than somebody who is steeped or in the culture that a piece of music comes from, but you can experience it. It's there. And I feel like that allows, and yeah, I think so. Musicians are often very aware that we know that everyone experiences music differently. Um, and I think that that leads many musicians to an attitude and a perspective of not only tolerance, but sort of finding joy in what you might think is a mistake. I think there's some traditions in jazz and composers who are intentionally using the wrong note. They know that they're playing a note that people will hear is wrong the first time, but then they play, it's repeated and it's repeated again. And that note is now taken, to be, correct or a part of the
Yeah,
composition,
right.
integral part. And I think that that happens too. Um, One of the best things I can say about a musician that I perform with is that they make me sound better when I play. And a part of that is the way that we interact with each other, not just for improvisation, but even for, performing something that has already been written, how we react to the tiniest nuance or the biggest wrong note can really direct, can make performances, just really special and meaningful. Um, so I think there's something about the way that we listen to music, and that music is fairly accessible. You don't have to study for years and years and years just to listen to music. And that gives us the opportunity to hear so many different ways of thinking about music, that it's more common, I think, for us to accept that the music that we haven't heard or we're not isn't a part of our tradition, that it isn't wrong, that we just instantly know, oh no, it's just something different, and we find beauty in those
Yeah.
differences.
So, how is your experience with the Surabhi ensemble different from your other groups and bands?
Mm. I really, um, so one of the number one differences, um, and this is probably very obvious to anybody, but from my background, I haven't spent so much time working with dancers, right? So, Surabhi, we compose and choreograph and create, music and dance performances. And the original pieces that we've created are really so collaborative, not just amongst the musicians, but also with our dancers, right? Where we really have to, I mean, the dancers, of course, are reacting maybe to the pieces of music that form a beginning of a composition. But then we musicians, especially if we're doing our jobs well, we are absolutely reacting and even changing the composition in order to support the dancer. And one of the things that I've learned about performing with Surabhi that is so different from other things that I've done is that when a dancer is on stage, that dancer is really, for most people experiencing the performance, that dancer is really the focal point. Yeah, that is really the first thing that people see, and maybe even they're experiencing the music through the visual presentation and the visual that the dancer gives. And lots of other kinds of music, that is not the case. It's much more just music, perhaps with singers, perhaps just instrumental. And music is much, just music is much more the central focal point of other performances and ensembles that I work with. Whereas in Surabhi, I oftentimes have to remember that no, the music actually that I'm playing right now, although very important, is not even quite as important as the storytelling and the visual presentation that the dancer that I'm collaborating with right now is making. I think I would also like to answer that same question in one other way, which is just, of course, to talk about collaboration. So, collaborating with dancers is also sort of this cross pollination and collaboration, right? I don't often get to work with such wonderful dancers. So that is one kind of way that I'm creating with somebody who has a completely different perspective, perhaps, on art than I do, right? The experience of art, of an artist being a dancer can be very different from the experience of an artist being a musician. But also, it's the cultural and cross-cultural connections that I find invigorating and just endlessly rich with opportunities. So it's understanding that there is a world, a universe of Indian classical musical traditions that I think I've accepted in my life that I will never actually understand or even really have proficiency in. But I have to know something, and I have to approach it, and I have to learn as much as I can, be as open as I can in order to react to and to support the music of someone coming from an Indian classical musical background and dance background. So the amazing thing, I think, is how tolerant we all are of each other, how patient we are with each other. Another example with Ronnie Malley, who is just an exceptional, brilliant musician, coming from a background in classical Arab and North African music, but also being steeped in many other musical styles that are more common in the United States. I also perform in an ensemble with Ronnie performing Arab classical music. It's a program that we get to roll out a few times a year. And again, I am novice, right? I am not really, studied in aspects of maqam in even if I were to pick like one tiny subset of Arab classical music, I can't say that I have any expertise in it. Yet Ronnie is able to present the music with his knowledge and to say like, hey, Greg, so think about this piece of this, classical music piece. Think about it this way. And he'll know something from Western music that I can sort of take and apply, that'll get me a little bit closer. So it's that example, but then repeated over and over and over again. I am not a flamenco musician. I do not have expertise in Spanish, uh, folk styles. I don't, or dance. But I've been playing with a bunch of wonderful flamenco artists for a number of years. I've learned a little bit, and I think I've learned to bring myself to any music like that I'm in cross collaboration, where my goal is not to all of a sudden become the perfect Indian classical musician or the perfect Arab classical musician or flamenco musician, or Mexican folk art musician. Another example where I am woefully undereducated. But the important thing for me is to listen, to react to the musicians and the art that is being presented to me, and to find ways for me to contribute that necessarily do come from my experience and from my cultural background and my journey, but to make those contributions fit and support, even if they are not sort of genuine uh, examples of a style and culture that I am, approaching. If they are genuine to me, and they're given sincerely, and if I'm listening as best I can and contributing as best I can, there's a lot of power and the ability to create something new, which I think that would describe Surabhi perhaps at our best moments, when all of us are engaged in those sorts of processes and are really creating something that did not exist before, just because we are willing to take those risks, be very patient with each other, and to create something new, and to be a little bit fearless about our process of doing that. Like knowing that, like, oh, I don't really know jazz. That's something Saraswati's told to me before. It's like, I don't really understand jazz. And she doesn't have to. That's not actually the point. And I hope it's similar for me, where the more I know, the more effective I can be, but it's more important. The process is even more important of creating, I think, for Surabhi.
I think that's the point that most non-Indians who engage with Indian music, they say that if they are learning Indian music, it's not to become an Indian musician
Yeah.
or to play Indian music, but to see what elements can be taken to enhance
Mm.
their own musical journey, and their what new they can offer to their own audiences,
Yes.
like you mentioned. Yeah.
Yes. And another thing that occurs to me, and maybe this is more specific. Well, from my perspective, this is true, where I really think that a part of the reason for that is also because Indian music, classical music, is very intimidating to learn. I mean, it is, instantly, you can hear, you can find complexity in even casual listening, but also when you hear stories of Indian classical musicians and their traditions and how they learned, and starting at age 4, and with complete devotion to the art and the I'm not sure the best word, and I hope I don't use the wrong word, but the tradition of apprenticing, yeah, to a professional as a child, like all of that to Westerners is very intimidating. So if I know that that's how lots of Indian classical music, if that is the root and the tradition and the sort of educational system, of course I'm a bit intimidated, because I'm no longer 4 years old. So that would be the first thing that's different. But I also believe that oh, in Spanish it's called ida y vuelta, where there and back again, where and this is a wonderful thing that happens in music, and it's something that I've been able to explore, starting with flamenco and North African musicians, but and also through Surabhi, where music leaves a place and goes to another place where people hear it, transform it, and then often send it back to the place where it originated from. I think that that's
Mm.
happened across the Atlantic Ocean, between Africa and the Americas, millions of times over the past few hundred years, where, music is leaving Africa and being heard in its other continent and then coming back to Africa and being reabsorbed in a different way by African musicians. I think,
Yeah.
one example is Fela Kuti, famous Nigerian pop musician, uh, really thinking about himself as playing jazz, right? Where he's identifying with the idiom that originated on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, you know,
Mm.
influenced by music that came from where he lived, but that transformed in the Americas and returned to West Africa.
Mm.
And so I think that there's so many instances of that, um, where we find tiny pieces of musical uh, traditions in flamenco or in North Africa, and find tiny pieces of musical traditions that really do remind us of music from the Indian subcontinent. Maybe
Mm.
that music took 1,000 years to get from one place to the other and then to return.
Mm.
And then I think also, this might be sort of specific as someone from the United States or North America, where just hearing the incredible influence of jazz and pop and R&B, uh, uh, throughout the world, um, and in Indian pop music too.
Mm.
Hearing things from Bollywood and just thinking like, oh, that reminds me of a piece of jazz music, or these chord changes. They really sound familiar, like
Mm.
have another. Maybe because again,
Yeah.
musicians everywhere, but also musicians and artists in India are taking pieces from other cultures and incorporating them,
Influence.
and you know and I think that that's
Absolutely.
wonderful, um, especially when it's done with a certain level of authenticity and of respect, right?
Yeah. Mhm. So, would you say, Craig, that in different parts of America, there's a difference in the receptivity to world music, Indian music? Like, would you say Chicago is different in some way to some other state where the presence of Indian music is less? Is there a uniformity of
I would,
acceptance and
the first thing I would say is that the geography is so much smaller, right? So I wouldn't actually say that uh, Chicago is very receptive to
Mhm.
Indian classical music or to the sort of synthesis and uh, fusion music that Surabhi creates. It really, I mean, my neighbor next door might not be interested in Indian classical music, and another neighbor might be. So I think amongst the populace, it's really hit or miss. Perhaps something about our modern culture, and you alluded to this earlier in the interview, I think, when you were talking about how music as a form of entertainment and the concept of entertainment is fairly recent in our histories, in human history. Yeah, but I think the we have access to so much music. I can
Hmm.
find anything on Spotify. Anything. I if I wanted to try and find something that I had never heard before and knew nothing about, it would only take me seconds to do that. And I think that definitely changes our appetites, right? Where,
Mhm.
um, you know, being having access to music and art and thought that is unfamiliar is no longer this very valuable and precious thing. It's something that we take for granted,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
And I think then that sometimes that also creates um, a more insular experience of art as entertainment, where people are more likely to sort of stay within their realms because they can find an infinite supply of the familiar, right?
Mhm.
I don't know if that makes sense. It's sort of counterintuitive, but it is something that I see more and more often, where you know you you don't have to look for the very new thing, and it's easy to take for granted our access to a myriad and an incredible uh, you know depth uh, and broad variety are just sort of things that we're very used to, I think.
Yeah. Now, I think with modern technology, especially with AI, it's able to pick on our tastes and what we like, and find randomly from all over the world similar sounding music.
Right, and I think the Spotify algorithm that's producing my feed, you
Mm.
know, it's feeding me what it already knows that I like. Um, it's not trying
Create
to
something
change me,
new. Like,
you know,
yeah.
so much. Perhaps
Yes.
that's true.
Yeah.
Perhaps AI will change. Perhaps AI will be like, oh, this person is,
More of the same.
yeah, we'll see. Yeah.
Yeah. So, just one last question.
Mm.
What are you looking forward in your tour to India apart from the music? Hmm.
The exchange. I will try to keep this answer brief to be respectful of your time, but in
Hmm.
other travels, in other tours, one thing that is always proven to be true is that even if I intend to share my music and to, you know, to be this performer and to um, share with audiences that may not have the same access to music and art that I am used to, I always find that with just about every audience anywhere in the world, that I get back more from the audience and from the people in a place that I'm visiting. I get much more than I give. I think has
Hmm.
been
Okay.
very true. So one of the things that I'm looking forward to is just that exchange.
Hmm.
It is random. It's unpredictable. It's hard to plan for, but it always happens. Um, where I will be learning things constantly just by having my ears and eyes and my heart open as I travel in a place that I've never been to before. So I'm very much looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And we're all looking forward to seeing you in Bangalore, where I stay, and also in other parts of India. Right?
Let's see
Looking
you in
forward to
Bangalore.
your music.
I'll
Yeah.
see you in Bangalore in a few weeks.
Yes,
All right.
absolutely.
Bye. Thank
Thank
you
you
so
so
much.
much. Yeah, it was lovely speaking to you.
And you too. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Namaste.